You're listening to The Foundation of Wellness, a refreshing take on diet and lifestyle, with Jessica Dogert, a registered dietitian nutritionist, and Marisa Moon, a Primal Health Coach. Hey everyone, it's me, Marisa Moon. I'm your host and producer, and I'm a Primal Health Coach who's certified to help people reach their wellness goals by using ancestral principles to guide us along the way. I'm also an intermittent fasting instructor, and I'm excited to be presenting on an upcoming summit. They're doing round 2 for the Habits to Thrive Summit. It's going to be October 28th, 2019 through November 3rd, 2019, and it's all free and it's all online. This summit's for you if you're looking for actionable ways to create new and better habits that support your health, and the advice is coming from my fellow Primal Health Coaches who specialize in ancestral health. And you can listen to one talk or just listen to all of them and stay inspired all week long. I will be presenting on how anyone can achieve long-term results with intermittent fasting, where I'll talk you through the biggest mistakes and assumptions people make when they start fasting, and I'll talk you through my brand new framework that reminds you where to start and how to progress with intermittent fasting. You can sign up for this free online summit called Habits to Thrive at bit.ly/habits to thrive. That's bit.ly/habits to thrive. Thank you, Anya Perry and Deanna Wilcox, the creators of this summit. It is so exciting to be a part of it again. I can't wait. Now, my guest today is someone doing big things in the world of wine. Yep, you heard me, wine. After 15 years in the wine business, Todd White is dedicating his life to educating and helping people make better choices about food and nutrition and how they think about consuming alcohol. He's the founder of Dry Farm Wines. He's also a writer, speaker, and a leading authority on healthy, organic, natural wines. Todd's passion is unlocking the best way to enjoy alcohol, how to enjoy the benefits of moderate consumption while avoiding the negative outcomes. Dry Farm Wines is the only lab-tested, all-natural, health-quantified wine merchant in the world. They actually biohack wine. They're quantifying organic and natural farming practices as well as low-intervention natural wine-making practices all around Europe and more. Dry Farm Wines curates all-natural, pure, real wines from all over the world, working with small family farms that are committed to producing pure, natural wines. This stuff is really special. Dry Farm Wines is endorsed by so many incredible health influencers in the United States, like Mark Sisson, who founded my Ancestral Health School and was also a guest on our podcast earlier, and Dave Asprey, the mastermind behind the Bulletproof Diet. Also endorsing Dry Farm Wines is Rob Wolf, the keto and paleo trailblazer, and Chris Kresser, leading functional medicine practitioner. And two of my favorite physicians you always hear us talk about on this podcast. They're both authors and huge leaders today in the health and nutrition world. That's Dr. Mark Hyman and Dr. David Perlmutter. So I bet you want to learn why we're all crazy about this wine, right? Well, let's dive into the interview. And just in case you don't make it all the way through, I want you to know that you can get a free bottle. Well, it's a penny for this extra bottle when you sign up for lab-tested Dry Farm Wines through our link. It's dryfarmwines.com/FOW podcast. The FOW stands for Foundation of Wellness. So that's dryfarmwines.com/FOW podcast. And I've been a member for a very long time. I just never knew something like this existed, and it's changed my whole relationship with drinking wine because, hey, this is about enjoying life, not just getting healthy, right? Here we go. Hey, Todd, welcome to the Foundation of Wellness.
I'm super happy to be here today. We have a lot to talk about.
Yes, we do. Did you just get back from traveling somewhere amazing?
I just returned from 3 weeks in Europe. So it started actually at the Biohacking Summit that was in London that was
Awesome.
hosted by Tim Gray, but is also co-sponsored by Upgraded Labs by Dave Asprey and also PaleoFX. So there were a bunch of Americans there. There were 10 of us from my office who went because we're all super dedicated to biohacking, have been for a long time. And so started in London, and then following London, we went on like sort of a 2-week tour of visiting with some natural wine growers that we work with across Europe, a few in Italy, and then into Austria. And then I came back from Amsterdam last night. So yes, I woke up at 3:30 this morning, Pacific time, wide awake. So it's adjusting into the re-entry, but we spend a lot of time in Europe because we only sell and drink natural wines from small family farms across Europe, and then we have 4 growers in South Africa. So we spend a lot of time, about half the year, kind of traipsing across Europe. So it's not such a bad job.
Oh man, well, I'm glad you do it because that's why you give us the best wines. And I never even really cared that much about what type of wine I was drinking until I started caring about my health. Then I recognized all these symptoms that were clouded by just nonsense I was dealing with earlier. Like, to put it plainly, I all of a sudden started getting more reactions to commercial wines. And I was getting headaches while I was drinking wine. And then I finally experienced dry farm wines at the PaleoFX and Bulletproof events. And I was just so in love with the concept, the dedication, the integrity, and the whole just natural wines movement is kind of silly because it's been around forever, right? The old world winemaking is what it's all about. And that's why you're going to places like Italy and France. Tell us about winemaking. What do you wish that the everyday consumer really knew about the different processes involved there?
Well, there's a lot to know. And so the wine industry has some dirty, dark secrets. And they've been very effective at keeping these secrets and help with their friends of the government. And so we can talk about sort of what the problems are. But, natural wines are the way wines were made for. Wine's been being made and consumed for over 9,000 years. And for most of all of that period, wines were naturally fermented. However, in the last 50 years, that has changed significantly. And the largest driver of that change has been money and greed, right? And so the same thing that's happened in our food supply has happened in our wine supply. So there's been massive corporate consolidation. So like in the United States, as an example, and everything I'm going to share with you is easily verifiable in a Google search. So they've been able to keep this all a big secret until I came along, but the fact of the matter is it's all quite public information. So we'll start with the consolidation issue. 52% of all wines manufactured, and I'm going to use that word manufactured because that's a critical term to understand. 52% of all the wines manufactured in the United States are made by just 3 giant conglomerates. And the top 30 companies make over 70% of U.S. wines. Now, the reason you don't know that is because these multi-billion-dollar marketing conglomerates hide behind tens of thousands of brands and labels to confuse you.
Wow.
So when you walk into the grocery store or into a wine shop, almost everything you see there, over half of it's made by just 3 people, right? 3 companies.
Whoa.
And when I say manufacturing, you ask about wine making. See, natural wines are grown, not made, because there's nothing in them. They're just naturally fermented grape juice. And when I say naturally fermented, we'll talk about that in a moment, what that means. That means fermented with wild, indigenous, native yeast that are on the skin of all grapes. Commercial wines are not fermented with wild yeast. They're fermented with genetically modified commercial lab-grown yeast. That's an important distinction between a natural and an unnatural wine. So natural wine term is very confusing to consumers because their first reaction isn't all wine natural? And no, it's not, for the reasons I'm about to describe to you. So you got this money thing that's really driving toxicity and the manipulation of real wine into something that they call wine, right? Has additives, maybe color agents, body stabilizers. So the thing that Americans don't know is that there are 76 additives approved by the FDA for the use in winemaking. 4 of them are quite toxic, and some of them are quite natural. So, but the problem is, because of the lack of transparency, because the wine industry has spent millions of dollars in lobby money, millions of dollars annually in lobby money, to keep contents labeling off of wine. So they don't want a contents label on it because they don't want you to know what's really in it. They want you to believe that it's fermented grape juice, but in fact it's stuffed with all these additives.
Wow.
So if we can debate with the wine industry, we can debate the toxicity of these additives. Half of them are classified by the FDA as grass was just generally regarded as safe, right? And then, as I mentioned, 4 of them are quite known to be toxic. So the wine industry has a lot of explanations around this. We're just like, hey, you can use all the additives that you want. I'm not going to drink it, but what I want to know is what's in my wine. Let's get contents labeling and transparency on it, right? Let's get nutritional information on it. Like, our wines are sugar-free. Commercial wines commonly contain sugar. Well, I do intermittent fasting, extended fasting. I'm also on a ketogenic diet and have been keto for about 5 years, long before it became fashionable, right? And so I want to know how much sugar is in my wine. That's something I have a right to know. Any kind of packaged food that I buy, which is rare, that I don't, but anything that comes in a package, I look at the contents label on it, as do you, because I want to know what's in it. All we say to the wine industry is, you can say that these additives are quite harmless or not. I'm telling you, 4 of them are known to be highly toxic. And so you can do a Wikipedia search that the most dangerous one's called dimethyl dicarbonate, right? And if you do a Wikipedia search on it, it'll have a summary section there, and it says hazard : toxic, right? And so we know when this additive is applied to wines, it's so toxic that a specially licensed contractor who's wearing hazmat suits comes in to apply it to the wine. It's used to treat the most common bacterial fault in wines, which is called Brettanomyces. This chemical is designed to kill Brettanomyces in wine. It's highly toxic. Nobody can be in the winery at the time of application. If you drank the wine within 24 hours of application, you would die. Wow. Right? And so this is fair enough. The chemical manufacturer who makes it claims that it hydrolyzes into carbon dioxide and methanol. I don't know whether that's true or not, but what I do know is that I just want a label there that tells me that dimethyl dicarbonate has been used to treat this wine. I can decide then if I want to drink that toxic wine or not. Right? So that's the whole problem here, is the lack of transparency. The wine industry is driving that same way that they drive higher alcohol. Here's the other problem with commercial wines. They're very high in alcohol. So we don't sell anything over 12.5% alcohol. In the United States, on average now, alcohols are reaching nearly 15% in wines and higher. So the problem with alcohol is that, and people are surprised to hear the wine guy say this, but the problem with alcohol is that it's a dangerous neurotoxin and it's a destructive drug. And so we need to be careful with its dosage. The wine industry, on the other hand, loves high alcohol because alcohol is a domino drug. What I mean by that is, just like as the dominoes fall, the more alcohol you drink, the more likely you are to drink more. You probably had that experience before.
Right.
And so the wine industry wants you to drink more. Well, here's another collusion between the government and the wine industry. The alcohol stated on a bottle of wine, which most people don't pay any attention to in the first place, but they should. But even then, the alcohol stated on a bottle of wine, by law, is not required to be accurate. Now, U.S. winemakers almost always average that number down, away from accuracy. And the reason being is for 2 reasons. A, they think it sounds a little better if it's a little lower alcohol. And then B, they pay excise tax to the federal government based on the level of alcohol. The higher the alcohol, the more tax they pay.
Oh, that's a big reason right there.
Right. And so this is what these are some of the things that are happening in commercial wines. Now, let's go back to this yeast discussion, the genetically modified commercial lab grown yeast. Now, why would you use that as a wine maker, right? I work with wine growers, but if you're a wine maker, why do you use a commercial yeast? Because it's more stable than the native yeast. It might not surprise you, these wild native yeast are very temperamental, right? They're from nature. They don't come from a lab. So they're temperamental. They also will not withstand a very high alcohol environment. So native yeast will die off if the alcohol environment gets too high.
Mm-hmm.
And number 3 and 4, you can't make wine in very large quantities using native yeast. It's just too unstable. Mm-hmm. So if you want to make a lot of wine like these big wine manufacturers make, you have to use a lab-grown yeast. Mm-hmm. And then number 4, these genetically modified yeast come in different flavor profiles. Now, what's that mean? It means that if you grow a scrubby, crappy grape in Central California, this industrial farmed grape that has no character, but you want it to taste like it's from the Mediterranean. You want it to taste like an Italian wine, they have a yeast for that. Right? And so this is what's happening in the commercial wine industry that nobody knows about, right? Mm-hmm. And even though I live in Napa Valley, which is the most important and significant wine appellation in North America, I didn't know anything about it either, right? And a lot of people here don't know anything about it. This is really going on deep in these factories, right? So, I give you an example of this consolidation and what's happening. You've probably heard of Robert Mondavi Winery, right? Mm-hmm. You see these magazine ads. It's a beautiful tasting room. It was designed in 1964 by Cliff May, who was a famous California mission architect. I used, until just recently, lived directly behind the winery. Pictures of the winery and, a guy and a gal out in the vineyard, drinking wine and talking about the Mondavi heritage and the family. And you'll see Robert Mondavi's, he's dead now, but you'll see his bust, as a part of their marketing materials and so on and so forth. Well, see, here's the story of what's really happening at Robert Mondavi. And what really happened is 12 years ago, the Mondavi family sold Robert Mondavi Winery to the second largest wine company in the world for $1.2 billion. So here's how you do that. Billion with the B. When $1 billion meant something 10 years ago, right? Wow. And so what happens then is that this large conglomerate, the second largest wine company in the world, which is actually based in New York, because what they do next is they take this family heritage and then they just blow it up, right? And so now they're manufacturing all these wines, have nothing to do with the Robert Mondavi heritage, have nothing to do with the Robert Mondavi winery. It's just got the Robert Mondavi label on it.
Right.
And now we're producing millions of cases, right, of this altered wine-like substance, right, hanging on the thread of the wonderful Mondavi heritage family story, right? That's how it's done. And so, and that's why they come to Napa and buy brands like Mondavi, and they buy many, many brands every year. And they do the same formula. Formula works very well because they've got these distribution channels in place at all the grocery stores and all the wine shops, and they have this massive distribution. And then they come in and they buy a brand that has this heritage meaning, and then they just blow it up into millions of cases that have nothing to do with that heritage or that family or Napa Valley or that vineyard or that winery. Does that make sense?
Yeah, what a shame.
Well, that's what's happening. And then they sell wine based on story, right? And based on this perception of story and pedigree and history and family and blah, blah, blah. But all that's false, right? And so what we've done is we're biohackers. We figured all this out, did a bunch of research on it. If you go see these wine manufacturing facilities, which are located in Central California, right? Glyphosate's another problem with U.S. wines, which we can talk about in a moment. But if you go see these wine manufacturing facilities located in the Central Valley in California, they are so big that it is as far as you can see. It's like multi football fields of manufacturing tank farms, what we call tank farms. Hundreds and hundreds of tanks outside, right? And what we would call a tank farm. These manufacturing facilities are massive, right? Like just bigger than you can imagine. So that's how. So, but then again, they're selling this wine through this kind of story. It's just not. It's just a false narrative.
Yeah.
So the industrial farming and irrigation, which is another problem with commercial wines. So 99.9% of all U.S. vineyards are now irrigated. And irrigation didn't come to grape farming in the United States until 1973. Prior to that, everything was dry farmed. As you know, the name of our company is Dry Farm Wines because all of our wines are grown without irrigation.
So irrigation for the listeners just means that they're watering the vines, right? The grapevines?
That's correct. It's got a little tube above the trunk of the vine that feeds the vine water and nutrient. Now, there's a whole bunch of problems with that. First of all, it's bad for the planet, right? So California's in a drought. So it's bad for the planet, number one. Number two, it's how it is thought how glyphosate is getting into wine, right? Glyphosate.
Water soluble.
Yeah. Roundup is the number one applied herbicide in U.S. vineyards. And so, and you can see when you drive through a wine region, you can tell which vineyards, which are most, have been treated with Roundup because it has a very dark moon-like surface below the vines. Nothing grows there. Nothing grows there.
That's why they spray it. They want to make sure no weeds grow there and competitive species.
But in a natural vineyard, there's what the farmer seeks is living soils and biodiversity, and they seek these plant materials. So when you look at a natural vineyard, it looks like a jungle, right? I mean, it's not been plowed. Most natural wine farmers do not plow the earth. Here's why. There are billions of organisms living below the surface of the soil. This is a part of living soil. These organisms that are just teeming throughout the soil. The moment you turn that soil up and expose it to the sun, you kill those tiny organisms that are so essential for living soil. So a natural wine farmer wants biodiversity. So they want a complete living ecosystem. Nature is designed to function in its own logic. And so when we started mono agriculture, which began in the 1920s, leaving a polyform of agriculture, which was just, everything living together in its same natural sphere, we started killing off parts of it to make it easier and more profitable to farm. This happened in the 1920s, really prolificated in the 1940s, right? And now it's universally practiced industrial farming almost everywhere.
Like for the listeners, that's what he's talking about is how you'll see rows and rows and rows of corn for acres at a time, or wheat. It's one crop. That's why they call it monocropping or a monoculture. So, nature works in diversity. So there would normally be all different species of plants growing in there because they all offer different things to the soil, to the environment, and to each other. And we've
insects, butterflies, birds, bees, animals, orchards. The natural wine farmer really thinks about the biodiverse structure of the farm, right?
Yes.
The whole living organism.
Ecosystem, right.
Right. And so this is the problem. So irrigation, leads to bad for the planet. Potentially, we think the way glyphosate is getting in wine, even on organic farms. It also creates a lazy plant. So bad for the vine, right? So The root structure of an irrigated grapevine is about 3 feet in diameter and about 3 feet deep because it gets all of its nutrient and its water right from this little tube above the trunks. It's very lazy. An unirrigated grapevine can have a root structure that can span 40 or 50 feet deep.
Whoa.
As this vine struggles against its neighbor, this struggle creates character in the fruit. That's why grapevines are planted close to each other, right? And so this struggle that the vines have among themselves and the way they communicate and the way they're struggling to go out and find nutrient, they have these little capillary, like hair-like roots that are breaking apart parts of the earth to garner nutrient and moisture, right? And so now you can't take an irrigated grapevine and convert it to dry farming. You have to pull it up because it doesn't have adequate root structure to support itself, right? You have to start dry farming when the vine is young and can establish proper root structure so it has enough root structure to go find the nutrient and moisture that it needs to survive and to thrive, right? And so it's a crime in most of Europe to irrigate a grapevine. And the reason being is because Europeans have been making wine for over 3,000 years. Now, what we know is that when you irrigate a grapevine, you fundamentally change the character and quality of the fruit that it produces. Now, there's one other problem with irrigation. And because we're health evangelists, irrigation is also unhealthy because irrigation, there's studies on this, published papers, irrigation leads to lower polyphenols and antioxidants in wine. It might not surprise you when you fill a grapeberry with water, it dilutes everything, including its health benefit, including its taste. Now, so you say, well, why would you irrigate if it's less healthy and the fruit tastes worse? Well, it's about money and greed. So, see, irrigated grapevines produce higher yields. They are easier to farm, much cheaper to farm. And also the fruit weighs more because when you fill the grapeberry with water and fruit is sold by the ton, fruit sold by weight, more it weighs, more it's worth.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
So the thing has happened in our food supply. We have allowed corporate America to, in this case, secretly damage the quality of our wine and damage the health quality of the wine, right? And add a toxicity to it, right? Secretly do that in conjunction with the government. Most industries couldn't do this for food and beverage because they have a contents label, right? And so this couldn't happen. But the wine industry has been clever enough to and successful enough with their lobbying efforts to keep transparency and contents labeling off of wine. So that's basically what's happened in the commercial wine industry, more or less. I mean, what we sell is called natural wine. And again, that's confusing to consumers, but natural wine is a very specific category of wine. And if you go online and you search natural wine, you'll see that it's a specific category that almost nobody knows anything about. It started in central France. It's very, very small. It represents less than 1/10 of 1% of all wine in the world.
Whoa.
Less than 1/10 of 1% of all wines in the world are natural. And we're the largest buyer and seller of natural wines on the planet, right? And we're really in the health food business. We just happen to sell wine. We're really health evangelists, right? And so it's just that we happen to like wine. And so, we were lucky enough to figure all this out and kind of help educate people. I think of my job not as selling wine, but just educating people. I don't care if you want to drink commercial wine or not. I think you should know what you're drinking, right? I think you should have a choice. If you decide that you want to go to the grocery store and buy a bottle of wine that's likely filled with additives and potentially toxic, that's fine. I celebrate that. I think you should have a choice, and you should be educated to be able to make choices. Same way we make choices in our food supply.
Absolutely. I remember the first time I heard you talking about wine on Abel James's podcast, like who knows how many years ago, The Fat Burning Man. And you really opened up my eyes to the fact that I never even wondered what was in the bottle of wine that I was purchasing. And then I was going to my local liquor store asking for natural wine, and they had no idea what I was talking about. So even if this is a established category in the wine industry, I don't think we can walk into the liquor store and say, do you have natural wines? They'll be like, oh, what do you mean, organic? And then they show you the organic section. I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah, well, organic is not necessarily natural. So this is a little bit confusing. All natural wines are organic, but not all organic wines are natural. And so, like if you go in Whole Foods and you see an organic wine in there, it's almost certain not to be natural. And here's why. If you can make enough volume of wine to sell to Whole Foods, you can't make it naturally, right? Wow. So Whole Foods can't go buy, they're not going to go buy from a small family farm in Europe, right? Because they can't supply any volume. Whole Foods is dependent upon volume, right? Because they're a massive grocer, right? Mm-hmm. So just because you see a wine, or even biodynamic, and biodynamic farming is an advanced prescriptive form of organic farming. Mm-hmm. And so even if it's biodynamic, there's a very large biodynamic producer in the United States. It's quite famous and make a very big deal out of their biodynamic production, which I'm sure that it's true. I'm sure that they're biodynamic, but they are not natural because you cannot make wine in the volume they make wine and ferment it with native yeast.
Right.
It's just impossible. And to make wine in these volumes without the addition or use of technology and alterations. Mm-hmm. It's just wine is too unstable bacterially. It's too unstable. It's too risky for the winemaker to produce wines in this volume without the use of these additives. That's just a fact.
I know from personal experience, too, my family makes wine, and they get the grapes, and they crush them, old school Italian style, in my grandpa's garage, and they just have them in these, I don't know what you'd call them, 10-gallon tubs, where they just let it ferment. They don't add anything. They don't add any yeast. It's all on the skins already, my grandpa tells me. And, of course, he gives it to me early. He gives me like 2 5-gallon jugs to take home and tells me how to take care of it and everything. But I left it in my car overnight, and my dad comes over, and he's like, what's the matter with you? Why'd you do that? This stuff is really temperamental. You probably ruined it. And I was like, what? And sure enough, there was all this mold on top. And I just imagine winemakers just got to do whatever they can to preserve their batch, and that's their money maker. So they're adding all this stuff you're talking about just to control it, and no matter how big they get, they can expect a result.
Yeah, and it's I'll give you another example of like a nasty additive. Have you ever seen people get purple teeth from drinking red wine?
Yes.
Right, that's probably almost always it's a color agent called mega purple. And Americans believe that the darker a red wine is, the better quality it is. Now, there's absolutely no truth to that myth. And in fact, I would tell you just the opposite in most cases. But this myth, this belief that dark wine is better wine has led to the massive use of color agents in addition to really long macerations, which is skin contact with the juice, which is how red wine gets its color. So just a quick winemaking lesson. If you squeeze the juice from a red wine grape and the juice from a white wine grape, they're both clear, right? Red wine gets its color from contact with the red skins and the seeds. That's where it gets its tannin structure. It's also why it's much higher in polyphenols and antioxidants than white wine. So white wine has just over 200 polyphenols in it, and red wine just over 800 polyphenols. And so these polyphenols are antioxidants, flavonoids, non-flavonoids that have beneficial health properties. The most famous one is called resveratrol. Mm-hmm. And so but back to maceration, this extended contact on the skins makes the wine darker, but it also contributes to excessive biogenetic amines, and the two primary offenders that make women particularly feel bad is tyramine and histamine. And so when you get these long macerations that are used in commercial winemaking to make wine darker, primarily, and to give it more body, then you also end up with these exaggerated amines, tyramine and histamine. So, we're the official wine for about 150 health and performance events around the U.S., all the big ones that you know about. And so, and then histamine conferences, like very obscure, kind of autoimmune, like all of these types of conferences, we're the official wine.
Wow.
Because our wines are super, super clean and don't have these effects. But the point I'm mentioning that to you is that I commonly come in contact with women in particular between the ages of 35 and 50 who tell me, I can't drink wine anymore. I love wine. Sometimes I'll have a glass of white, but I cannot drink red wine anymore. Yep. It just makes me sick. I get splotchy. I get stuffy. Headaches. I get a headache. It's like, no. You can drink this red wine. Are you sure? Yes, I'm sure. So have some of this tonight. We do tastings at night at these events. Have some of this tonight. Come back. Let me know tomorrow. I guarantee you're not going to have any of these negative effects that you're accustomed to from commercial wines. And in fact, they don't. Even if I drink a commercial wine today.
Same for me.
Yeah, even if I drink a commercial wine today, I'll get a headache. And I just don't drink them. And so, fortunately,
most women think that it's from the sulfites or for the tannins. That's what I hear all the time. It's the sulfites. It's the sulfites.
That's not true. Here's how we know that's not true. Sulfites are naturally occurring in all wines. The question is whether or not additional sulfur dioxide has been added and how much.
Right.
Now, we don't know. Sulfur dioxide has been used to preserve wine for centuries. So, I don't have any real big issue with sulfur except how much is being used. But here's what we know for what's statistically factual is that there are more sulfites naturally occurring in white. So we know for sure that it's not the sulfites that are causing these symptoms. Most often it's these biogenetic amines. Most often. Could be sugar, look, when you put sugar and alcohol together, you get a dramatically nastier effect than just the alcohol alone. I'll demonstrate that to you from, if you have a shot of tequila, that's a very different experience than drinking a margarita, right? In terms of how you're going to feel, right? So when you put that sugar and alcohol together, you get kind of a double whammy. Right, in terms of negative effect. And many commercial wines contain sugar. And it's not added sugar. There's a process how the sugar gets in the wine, but it's not added. What happens is that the winemaker uses sulfur dioxide. The sulfur dioxide is used 3 or 4 times in the commercial winemaking process. But one of the times that it's used is to kill the yeast before it completes fermentation, leaving residual sugar, or RS as it's known in the industry, leaving residual sugar behind in the wine, right? I don't want to drink sugar. I'm kind of live a sugar-free life. And so so here's all the times that sulfur dioxide is used to in commercial winemaking. So first of all, as soon as the juice is pressed, sulfur dioxide is dumped into the juice to kill the native yeast. Once the native yeast has been killed, then they inoculate with this commercial genetically modified yeast. That's the first time it's used. The second time it's used is to kill the commercial yeast prematurely prior to them completing fermentation. So how you get a sugar-free wine is that if the yeast is allowed to eat all of the available sugar, then you have a complete fermentation. The yeast will die because it has no other food source.
Right.
Then you have a completely fully fermented wine, and that wine will be sugar-free because the yeast ate all of the available sugar.
Doesn't that mean it's higher in alcohol?
That's a really, really good point. That's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up. You're like one of only, I've discussed this topic with 100 or 150 podcasters. You're only the second one that's ever brought that up. And that's a really interesting question. Yes is the short answer, depending upon the sugar at the time of picking. So depending upon the sugar at the time of picking, which is another problem with irrigation, the higher the sugar, or the Brix, as it's measured in grapes, the higher the sugar in the fruit at the time of the picking will determine the amount of the outcome in alcohol, right? So I was just in Italy doing harvest this past week, where growers were picking in 15 to 16 to 17 Brix. This just as an international measurement. 15 Brix, 16 Brix. In California, the average Brix at harvest is 26, right? And part of the reason for that is irrigation, and here's why. When you fill a grape berry with water, you dilute its flavor, right? You also increase its weight, which is profitable, but you decrease the flavor. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that when a berry is filled with more water, it has diluted flavor. So you can't pick at low Brix like that. What you have to do is allow the grape to ripen further and the sugar levels to become much higher to develop proper flavor in the fruit. It's really the flavors around the sugar and the ripeness. That's not how natural wines are made. Natural wines are picked at much lower sugar. Of course, they're not irrigated. And so when you pick at lower sugar and the wine fully ferments, it's sugar-free but still lower alcohol. And so that's...
the reason I probably thinking about this, not only because of my experience with winemaking with the family, but also because I went to this Amarone demonstration. Amarone is like a Italian Valpolicella region wine made from non-irrigated grapes or something.
Sure.
And they were telling me that the sugar is more concentrated in those grapes, and that's why it's a higher alcohol wine.
It's true.
So if all your wines are dry farmed, are they not higher in sugar to begin with, or?
Yeah, they pick at a lower sugar
ripeness.
level,
Yeah.
a lower ripeness. And see, because it's organically farmed, because it's a natural product, because it's unirrigated, it develops these beautiful characters and flavors at much lower sugar levels. So the lower the sugar level at the time of harvest will determine the alcohol. We don't sell anything over 12.5. And most of the wines I drink personally are between 9.5 and 11% alcohol. See, I don't like alcohol. I love wine. I don't love alcohol. Alcohol in moderate doses, I drink a bottle of wine a night. So alcohol in moderate doses is a much, much different experience, both for your health and your brain health and just how you feel, right?
Yeah.
Alcohol, doesn't make you feel great the next day. So lowering down alcohol has a huge impact on how you feel. It also has a huge impact on the quality and the energy of the buzz that you're experiencing during the time you're drinking, right? It's just a lighter dose. It's just fresher. It's just more fun. It's more creative expressively.
Yeah.
But let me talk for a second as we kind of close up here. The beautiful thing about wine, right? Because I've just hammered the shit out of it, right? It's this is this terrible thing, but natural wines are still living. So they haven't been sterilized with sulfur dioxide. The final dose of sulfur dioxide, which we didn't talk about a moment ago, comes at bottling, right? This is when the most massive dose of sulfur dioxide goes in. This is to sterilize the wine, or what we call mummify it, so you can McDonald'ize it, right? So you want every single bottle to be very consistent, bottle to bottle, sit on that shelf year after year, taste the same all the time. That's because the wine has been sterilized. Natural wines are still living. They have not been sterilized with sulfur dioxide. So all the gut-friendly bacteria that is friendly to the microbiome. Dr. David Perlmutter wrote a post last year on this about our wines. All the gut-friendly microbiome, the bacteria that's in living wines, is in natural wines, is still alive because it hasn't been killed, right? And so drinking natural wines is actually, we published a magazine, just came out today, and there's an article in it about wine as a probiotic, right?
Wow.
So
prebiotic, or yeah.
So it's so these living wines have soul and spirit. There's taste alive. You can just taste them. They're just like teeming with energy, right? And so, wine around the dinner table is just a magical thing. I don't drink during the daytime. I don't recommend other people do either, in part because it shuts down all your fat burning, right? Because it's an exogenous energy source that it's a substrate that the body has to process, and so it shuts down all of your fat burning. And I like to burn fat during the daytime, and I don't think it's good for brain health to drink in the daytime very often. But around the dinner table, what with friends or family or old friends or new friends, it just creates a bond of love. So to share wine and food together, whole living wine and whole living foods, it's just a spiritually nourishing thing, right? Also rolls down that window of vulnerability just a bit, where you're just a little more accessible, right? Yeah. And the more accessible we are, the more we're seen, the more we see others, the more we can feed the most fundamental human need that we have, which is to love and be loved, right? And wine just engenders a lot of love. And anything that you can find that adds more love to your life, I think you should spend more time with it.
Oh yeah. And they have it good where you were just visiting. I mean, in Europe, they'll stay around the dinner table for 4 hours, and even the 14-year-olds are sitting around drinking wine with the family, and it's a whole different experience. I mean, I have so many friends, Todd, that say, "Oh, I can't drink red wine because I'll get too sleepy." Like when we're out for girls' night or we're at each other's house. And it's different with dry farm wines. I don't get headaches when I drink dry farm wines, not during drinking, which happens to me all the time with commercial wines, and not the next day. And even happens to me with organic wines, everybody. My poor family's trying to keep up with all of my needs, all of my quirks that I have acquired along my health journey. And they're like, "Oh, I bought you organic wine." And I feel so bad when I start drinking and I get a headache. I'm like, do I just endure the headache, or do I just admit that I can't have this? I mean, I go to chlorella all the time because chlorella helps me with those headaches. I've told my listeners before, we use Energy Bits brand chlorella. It's amazing. But your wine, I thought it was maybe I wasn't reacting because you test for mold toxins. What do you think it is that I am reacting to? And for our listeners, by the way, if you can't stay to listen to the end, go to dryfarmwines.com/FOW podcast, and you can get your own case of wine from Dry Farm Wines, and you can get a free bottle, or a bottle for a penny. Is that right, Todd?
That's right. We can't give alcohol away legally, so we just include an extra bottle for a penny. So you can find that at dryfarmwines.com/FOW podcast, just like it sounds. But anyway, here's the thing. We don't know fully. There's been no research, no testing, no funding, no blind study, no double-blind studies on wine. We don't know which of the additives. We don't know if it's the native yeast versus commercial yeast. We don't know if it's extra sulfur dioxide. We don't know if it's all these other additives. We don't know if it's just higher alcohol. We don't know if it's the winemaking styles or contact with wood products, right? Natural wines don't use new oak. New oak is or dust or chips or however they impart oak flavors in New World wines. So there's any number of different ways that flavor can be added. But we don't know. We believe that new oak is potentially dangerous to our health. But we don't know we can't point to any one thing and say, it's this thing that's causing you to feel bad, because we don't know. There's no research. Here's what we do know. That if you drink that commercial wine, we know you're going to have a substandard feeling of health, right? We know if you drink a natural wine, low alcohol natural wine, you're going to feel great, and you're not going to have any negative remnants. I can't tell you one which one of the 10 potential problems,
Mm-hmm.
right, that it might be. I just can tell you that when you drink this, you're going to feel wildly different,
Mm-hmm.
right? And but you mentioned mold testing as an example. We test every wine for mycotoxins, and particularly we're looking for ochratoxin A, which can be quite common in wines. Now, here's the problem. In the United States, testing for mold or mycotoxins is not required by the FDA. It's not required that wines be tested for any kind of mold or mycotoxin. In the EU and Europe, it is a legal requirement that all wines are tested for mold. And the tolerance for testing in wine is actually lower than what is even allowed in coffee, right? And so here's the thing. The only time a U.S. wine ever gets tested for mold is if it gets exported to Europe, because the Europeans require the testing.
Yeah.
Right? And so this is just another collusion. Now, the test is quite expensive. That's the reason that the U.S. doesn't want to do it, right? There's a whole battery of tests for wines, but certain ones are very expensive and the others not so much, right? And so anyway, but yeah, we test every wine. We test wines for a lot of things, including sugar, alcohol, mycotoxins, pesticides, all kinds of things that we test wines for. Sugar, right? Because we want the only way we know that a wine is sugar free. You can't always taste it, but the only way we know a wine is sugar free is lab tested.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate that so much. I mean, I've been talking to my listeners about lowering their carb intake, lowering their sugar intake, just for general health, but also for so many other things that we're living with day in and day out and complaining about, including excess body fat, lack of concentration. And really, I think if you're watching your sugar in your diet, there's no reason you shouldn't be watching your sugar in any type of liquid that you're consuming. And hopefully if you're drinking alcohol, you're going to start thinking about, having some standards related to the kinds we're discussing here. Lucky for us, Dry Farm Wines makes it so easy because I can get a different bottle from them every single month. I can go on their website and skip a month or cancel by just a click of a button. And I can choose a mixed box of white and red. I can get rosés. I can get sparkling. They always have like specials going on, so you can just buy a 3-pack of Pinot Noir right now. I mean, it's so cool to be a part of Dry Farm Wines. I think what you guys are doing is a fun experience too, because I think I could read half of the labels. They really are from, different cultures and countries around the world, and you can't find them in your liquor store. I can tell you that much because I've tried.
For sure. But let me tell you what they can, as I mentioned, our primary goal is not selling wine. Our primary goal is to educate people. And so in closing up, let me just mention this, because you live right outside of Chicago. You don't have to buy Dry Farm Wines in order to drink natural wines. But that being said, Dry Farm Wines is a bar above natural. So in addition to natural, we then have all these other criteria like lower alcohol, sugar-free, so on and so forth. We have a number of criteria that are over and above just being natural. Awesome. But that being said, if you were going to drink natural wine, you're going to be much better off just drinking natural wine, whether or not it meets our criteria or not. So There are two ways to do that. Like if you live in a major market like Chicago or near a major market, Chicago, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Washington, New York, there are going to be natural wine retailers. And if they sell natural wine, they won't sell anything else. It's sort of like it's sort of an obsession,
Yes.
It's an obsessive movement. I mean, it's a revolution. Like you don't go into a wine store and they're like, oh, we have some natural wine over here and commercial wine over here. It doesn't work that way.
Okay.
A natural wine retailer only sells natural wine, right?
I understand.
And there are two ways that you can find those retailers. One is to do a Google search for natural wine in your market. And number two, there is a smartphone app called Raisin, and it's more popular in Europe, but still in major markets here, you'll have listings, and it's a map-based service, and it shows you natural wine retailers and restaurants or bars that that have natural wine products. And so
Awesome.
that can be kind of helpful. So it's raisin, just like the dried fruit, and its own Android and also on Apple Store. So that's a great way to find
Yes.
wine resources, or just do a Google search. Of course, you buy wine from us, and you're going to get a whole thing. But I just think people should really be drinking natural wines for their health, whether they get them from us or not.
Yes, and they don't have to give up wine. So many of us on this health journey think we need to give up wine if we want to lose weight, if we want to be healthier. And I'm so glad that you can teach us all of this, because it's a big secret. Nobody knows these things. And now every time I see somebody's teeth purple, I think of you.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm like, I just wish that they weren't drinking that wine.
They don't know. And, they think, people think that that's just how wine tastes and what the experience with wine is. And it's just not. It's not real wine. It's not honest wine. And so and there's just so very little of it in the world. And as I mentioned, we're the largest buyer by many multiples. And so it's like there's just not much supply out there. Which is why we're in Europe all the time trying to get more supply. But anyway,
awesome.
Thanks for having me on today.
You're welcome. And to all of our listeners, one little thing I learned from drinking dry farm wines and natural wines is, like he said, they are alive and they don't have preservatives and sulfites added to sterilize them. So I always use a vacuum cork in mine, and it helps keep the air out. And my red wine even stays in the fridge after it's open, because it'll last the rest of the week. And I know some people like Todd are drinking the whole bottle that night, but for me, I might just have a glass and I want another glass the next day. Well, you got to care for these wines, and they are alive. So much to learn here. Thanks for taking the time, Todd. And if everyone wants to learn more, of course, they can go to dryfarmwines.com/FOW podcast. And you guys are on social media too at Dry Farm Wines, correct?
Yes, everything is Dry Farm Wines.
And keep an eye on Todd White, because he is the ultimate biohacker. He's doing big things. He's fasting, doing alternate day fasts. He's on a personal challenge coming up to fast certain days of the week. Isn't that right?
Yeah, so I've experimented with this once before, but I'm going to. So I've been on a once-a-day meal for about 3 years now, and during that same period, I've experimented with a whole bunch of different extended fasts and different protocols, including alternative day. But I experimented last year with a protocol that I'm going to start again, and going to actually extend it for a little longer, and that's only eating on Thursday through Sunday, but not eating Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And so I'm really excited about that. I did it for a few weeks before. I'm going to do it for a couple of months and see, because the thing about fasting, as you know, fasting is largely psychological, right? And so if you can lean into the control of that, the mental control, lean into, and I'm single, I live alone, so it's a lot easier for me to experiment with these protocols versus being in a relationship with somebody who doesn't want to go along with it, or so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. So it's, I'm able to do these crazy regimens because this thing is just very psychological. When I used to do the Lean Gain 16-8 fast regimen back before, for about 2 years before I went to a once-a-day meal. And it's worth noting, I don't drink when I fast. So if I'm on a multi-day fast, I don't drink during those days.
Thank you.
And don't recommend anybody else does either. But when I went from twice a day meals to once a day, because I was ketogenic, I didn't find that I was hungry. Mm-hmm. There was a psychological adjustment that took about a month, for me to sort of just settle into this new routine of not eating. Mm-hmm. Right. And so, now I'm never hungry. I don't eat because I'm hungry. I eat generally because I want to drink. Mm-hmm. Right. And so, and again, on the days that I'm not eating on multi-day, then so in this new protocol, then I won't drink wine between Monday and Wednesday, between Sunday night, right, when I last eat, and I don't eat again until Thursday night, because I only eat once per day, I won't eat again until Thursday. So I eat Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then not again until next Thursday. So I did this last year for a couple of weeks. I'm going to extend it to a month or two. I mean, I think ideally, if I can adjust to it psychologically and find that I can lean into the pleasure of it, like I think it's a real pleasure to only eat once per day now. If I can lean into it, then I, maybe even adapt it, fairly permanently. I'm just really huge believer in fasting, particularly for anti-cancer. 1 in 2 people are going to get cancer. I'm, at an age where that matters to me. I'm also trying to slow the aging process down. And so I think fasting is very effective for that, very effective for inflammation. And so,
absolutely.
Yeah, so I'm just a huge, huge, huge fan. I tell people all the time of all the biohacks that I do, and there's a long list of them. But of all the biohacks I do, I think the greatest advancement, other than meditation, I think the greatest advancement in my overall wellness was when I went from eating twice a day to once a day. I thought it was just a huge leap forward. It doesn't work for everybody. Fasting is not right for some women. Doesn't agree with them hormonally. So it's like, my system is not the right system for everybody. We're all different. But I think the important thing is just to continue to experiment with, different protocols and see what works best for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a 36-year-old female, and fasting has changed my life. And that's why I now share it with others. So if anybody wants to join the conversation, you can find me on Instagram at Marisa_Moon_. And of course, Todd White, thank you so much for being here and for inspiring us all to just seek for higher performance, better quality of life, and cleaner living. Thank you so much.
Share more love with the world. Bye.
As always.
Thanks for having me today.
You're welcome.